All right, strap in. Because today we're diving deep into a story that's practically ripped from the headlines.
Mm.
We're talking about India and Canada, their relationship. It's complicated. And right at the heart of it all, the Sikh Separatist movement.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. You've got ancient empires and warrior religions all mixed up with modern-day political intrigue and even assassinations.
I mean, how do we even get from turbans and temples to accusations of terrorism and countries refusing to talk to each other? It's a lot.
It is, but that's why we're here, to untangle it all, connect those historical threads to what's playing out right now on the world stage.
Okay, so I know bits and pieces about Sikhism, like the turbans and their warrior traditions, but paint me the full picture. I need those details.
Well, we got to go back, way back to the 15th century. That's when Sikhism pops up, right in the Punjab region of northwest India. Now, the Punjab, geographically speaking, it's always been this crossroads. Empires clashing, trade routes meeting. The Indus River Valley, super fertile, so it attracted everyone. But that also meant constant conflict. Mughals from the east, invaders from the west.
So Sikhism is born right in the middle of all of that.
Exactly. The founder, Guru Nanak, he was inspired by Hinduism and Islam, but his vision, a totally distinct faith.
So a blend of two major religions forged in constant conflict. That's pretty intense.
Oh, it is. But it's more than just a blend. They've got their own scriptures, traditions, and you can't miss those 5Ks, those outward symbols central to their identity.
Okay, 5Ks.
Yeah.
Help me out here. I'm drawing a blank.
Think of them as commitments. Each one stands for a virtue. So Kish, that's uncut hair, usually kept in a turban, represents spirituality, strength, and practically, in that hot climate, a turban's pretty handy.
Makes sense. What else?
Kanga, a little wooden comb in the turban, cleanliness and discipline. Then you've got Kara, the steel bracelet, eternity and unity, constant reminder of their faith.
A physical reminder. Interesting.
Then there's Kachera, a specific type of undergarment, all about self-control, readiness for action.
Wow, so they're always prepared.
You got it. And finally, Kirpan, the ceremonial dagger.
Right, I've heard about that.
Represents courage, defending justice. But remember, for Sikhs, it's not about aggression. It's about protecting the weak and fighting injustice.
So each item is a symbol, but also like a way of life.
Exactly. And this strong sense of identity built over centuries, it's what's given them resilience, influence in India and around the world.
Okay, so we have this unique warrior religion. But how do they go from defending their faith to being part of the British Indian Army?
Well, the British, during their expansion across India, they noticed these Sikh warriors, disciplined, skilled, valuable assets.
So they were like, hey, we could use some of that.
Pretty much. Sikhs were known for their loyalty, fearlessness in battle, amazing horsemen, incredible with weapons. The British saw that and jumped at the chance to recruit them. You gotta remember, before the British, there was the Sikh Empire, a force to be reckoned with. They'd challenged the Mughals multiple times. Their warrior reputation was already set.
The British just tapped into that existing warrior culture. And I bet fighting for the British Empire had a huge impact on the Sikh community.
Absolutely. It exposed them to the world beyond India, broadened their horizons, planted the seeds for a global Sikh diaspora. Many traveled with the British, ended up in places like Canada, Malaya, East Africa. New cultures, new ideas. It shaped them.
Hold on. So fighting for the British led to Sikhs settling in Canada. And somehow this ties into the current political mess. Okay, now I'm really interested. Tell me more about this Khalistan movement.
All right, fast forward to the mid-20th century. India gets independence, but then there's partition. British India gets carved up. Pakistan is born. And the Punjab, the Sikh heartland, it gets split right down the middle.
Oh.
Chaos, violence, mass displacement, riots. The Punjab, already diverse and tense, became the epicenter of this upheaval.
So partition creates this mess, and Sikhs are left feeling pushed aside in this newly independent India.
Exactly. That's where the Khalistan movement comes in. Disillusionment, the desire for self-determination, Sikhs feeling like their language, their culture, their political rights, all being chipped away by the Indian government. The demand for an independent Khalistan, a Sikh homeland, started growing louder and louder.
But I doubt India was just going to let go of such an important region.
You're right. The Punjab, it's the breadbasket of India. Fertile, agriculturally rich, and strategically it borders Pakistan. So any talk of secession, the Indian government saw it as a threat. Tensions just kept escalating throughout the 70s and early 80s. And then Operation Bustar in 1984, big turning point.
Right. That's the one I keep hearing about, the Golden Temple, right?
Right. Yeah. The Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple. the holiest shrine in Sikhism. Not just a place of worship, it's a symbol of Sikh identity and resilience. Located in Amritsar, a city that's sacred to Sikhs. Now, in 1984, you have Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, a charismatic Sikh leader.
Okay.
He and his armed followers occupy the Golden Temple complex. They're demanding an independent Khalistan. Bhindranwale was a complex guy, controversial too. Advocated for a return to traditional Sikh values, a stronger Sikh identity within India. His message resonated with a lot of Sikhs who were feeling disillusioned, marginalized.
But the Indian government's response, Operation Blue Star,
Yeah.
sending the army into your own country's holiest site, that's got to be devastating.
It was a controversial move, no doubt. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, she gives the green light. Military operation to clear the militants out of the Golden Temple.
Wow.
Significant casualties, Bhindranwale is killed. Even the Golden Temple itself is damaged. The army storming the holiest shrine, gunfire, casualties, sacred structures damaged. It's a moment seared into the memory of Sikhs worldwide.
And I'm guessing the consequences went way beyond the Punjab, especially for the Sikh diaspora in Canada.
Absolutely. Sikhs in Canada, they're watching all this unfold and they're horrified, angry, feeling a deep sense of betrayal, outrage.
This is where Indira Gandhi's assassination comes in, right?
Sadly, yes. Just a few months after Operation Blue Star, she's assassinated by two of her own Sikh bodyguards.
Wow.
They were seeking revenge for what they saw as the desecration of their holiest shrine.
So things really spiraled out of control after
They
this.
did. Anti-Sikh violence erupts across India. Thousands of Sikhs killed in riots, their homes and businesses destroyed. This horrific event, the 1984 Sikh massacre, it left a deep scar. The divide between Sikhs and the Indian government just grew wider, and the Khalistan movement found fertile ground in countries like Canada, where Sikh communities were already established.
Okay, so this tragedy directly links back to the Sikh diaspora in Canada. The fight for Khalistan isn't just some far-off struggle anymore. It becomes deeply personal.
You got it. The 1984 massacre, it was a turning point. It radicalized many Sikhs in the diaspora. They felt like India couldn't be trusted to protect their rights, their safety. The Khalistan movement gained new momentum, and Canada became a hub for activism and fundraising.
So from here, the story shifts to Canada. A Sikh community, deeply scarred by violence, a growing movement for Khalistan, and Canadian politicians trying to figure out how to handle this super sensitive situation.
You're catching on. The Sikh diaspora in Canada, they became a real political force. Canadian politicians, they're walking a tightrope. They want those Sikh votes, but they also want to stay on good terms with India.
Right, because making India mad, a rising power, that's not exactly good for Canada. But how do we get from there to espionage and assassinations? That's where things get really interesting.
It takes a dark turn. And to understand it, we need to go back to the 1980s, the bombing of Air India Flight 182.
Right, that horrific terrorist attack. Hundreds of people killed, most of them Canadians. I remember learning about that. Wasn't it linked to Sikh extremists?
Yes, Air India Flight 182, going from Montreal to London, blown up off the coast of Ireland, June 1985. Deadliest act of terrorism in Canadian history. And the investigations, they pointed to Sikh Separatists.
Wow. So Canada's dealing with this complex political situation within its Sikh community, the trauma of this massive terrorist attack linked to the Khalistan movement, and strained relations with India. This is setting the stage for the current crisis, isn't it?
You're on the right track. This brings us closer to today, where those historical wounds are reopening in a dramatic way.
Okay, this is where I need your expertise. Let's talk raw. India's intelligence agency is accused of operating on Canadian soil, assassinating Sikh leaders. It sounds like a spy movie.
It does, doesn't it? RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing, India's external intelligence agency. They gather intelligence, conduct covert ops abroad, and in recent years, there have been some pretty credible allegations linking them to the assassinations of Sikh activists in Canada.
Wow. So we've got this brewing diplomatic crisis, fueled by decades of grievances, political maneuvering, and now accusations of state-sponsored assassinations. This is huge.
It is, and to understand India's response, we need to understand war elephant diplomacy.
War elephant diplomacy. Okay, I need you to break that down for me.
Imagine a war elephant, powerful, imposing, unafraid to use its size to get what it wants. That's how some people describe India's foreign policy these days. They're flexing their economic and military muscle, pushing back against any accusations, deflecting pressure.
So India's not backing down. In fact, they're doubling down.
You got it. India, under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he's cultivated this strongman image. They've adopted a much more muscular approach to international relations, projecting strength, sending the message that they won't be bullied.
So we're seeing this war elephant diplomacy in how they're responding to Canada. What's that look like?
Well, they've slapped visa restrictions on Canadians, launched cyber attacks on Canadian institutions. They've even hinted at possible military action. And they've accused Canada of harboring Khalistani terrorists, essentially turning the tables, putting Canada on the defensive.
This is high stakes. And I bet Canada, especially Prime Minister Trudeau, is feeling the heat.
He is. The Khalistan issue, it's become a political minefield for Trudeau. His political survival depends on the support of the New Democratic Party and their leader, Jagmeet Singh, a prominent Sikh politician.
Right. And I bet he's not too thrilled with how Trudeau's handling this whole thing.
You're right. Singh has been critical of Trudeau, accusing him of putting diplomatic ties ahead of the safety and concerns of Canadian Sikhs. It strained their alliance, put Trudeau's leadership in a precarious position.
Wow. We've covered a lot. Origins of Sikhism, international assassinations, political games, a diplomatic standoff between two major democracies. This is intense. Okay, I need a minute to process all that. This deep dive, it's like a whirlwind. History, politics, international drama. It's crazy how domestic politics in both India and Canada are so tied up in this crisis.
It really shows you how much domestic pressure can influence a country's actions on the world stage. Both Trudeau and Modi are walking a tightrope here, trying to keep everyone happy, their own people and other countries. It's a tough balancing act.
Like a game of chess, but with more players and constantly shifting alliances. You mentioned earlier that Sikh separatism is really rooted in the Punjab region. I'd love to get a better sense of what life was like for Sikhs there, especially in the years leading up to those pivotal events.
Okay, so picture the Punjab region. It's the breadbasket of India. Fertile land, 5 rivers flowing through it. That's actually where the name comes from. Punjab. It means 5 waters.
I didn't know that.
For centuries, it was a real melting pot. Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, all living side by side. And historically, wow, ruled by so many empires, Mauryas, Guptas, Mughals, even the Sikhs themselves had an empire there. That history, it's left a mark on the land and its people.
So it sounds idyllic. What went wrong? How did this melting pot become a flashpoint?
Well, British colonialism had a lot to do with it. The British, they were masters of divide and rule. They played different religious and ethnic groups against each other.
Classic strategy.
Created resentment, mistrust. And then, when India got independence in 1947, the Punjab was divided, split between India and the newly formed Pakistan.
Oh, right, partition.
And it was brutal. Mass displacement, communal violence, people uprooted, leaving everything behind, witnessing horrific things. It left deep scars on the Sikh psyche, a sense of grievance and injustice that's really hard to shake.
Partition. It must have been incredibly traumatic for everyone, especially for Sikhs whose homeland was literally cut in two.
Absolutely. It was a defining moment, shaped their collective memory and their relationship with India. Even after independence, those wounds of partition, they festered. Many Sikhs felt betrayed by the promises of a secular, inclusive India.
So that sense of betrayal, that feeling of being marginalized, it all feeds into the Khalistan movement.
Exactly. They felt like their language, their culture, their political rights, all under attack by the Indian government. They wanted self-determination, a homeland where they could freely practice their faith and govern themselves.
And I can only imagine that the Indian government's response, especially Operation Blue Star, just made that feeling of alienation even worse.
It definitely did, sending the army into the Golden Temple. For many Sikhs, that was an attack on their faith, their identity, fueled the perception that the Indian government was hostile to their aspirations. The Golden Temple, it's not just a building, it represents Sikh history, resilience, sovereignty. Sikhs from all over the world go there to connect with their roots, find solace. So when the army stormed in, it felt like an attack on the very heart of Sikhism.
Okay, so there's this deep well of resentment. It's rooted in history. But what about today? Are there issues, ongoing grievances that are still feeding these tensions?
Oh, absolutely. One big one is the perception that Sikhs in India still face discrimination, human rights abuses.
Like what?
There are reports of police brutality, extrajudicial killings, restrictions on religious freedom, and whether those reports are completely accurate or not, They tap into deep-seated fears. The mistrust runs deep.
So it's like a tinderbox just waiting for a spark, and it seems like the assassinations were that spark.
You could say that. The killings of Sikh activists in Canada, allegedly by Indian agents, it reignited fears and anger. It brought back those painful memories of the 1984 massacre, reinforced the belief that India is a hostile force.
So this volatile mix of past trauma and present-day grievances, that's what's driving this current crisis. But let's shift gears for a minute. Let's talk about Canada's role in all this. They're in a tough spot, right? A large Sikh population that's politically active, but they also need to stay on good terms with India.
It's a classic dilemma, balancing domestic politics with foreign policy. Canada, they pride themselves on being multicultural, upholding human rights, freedom of expression. They can't ignore the concerns of their Sikh citizens, especially when there's evidence of a foreign government doing bad things on Canadian soil.
But making India mad would have consequences. India is a major economic and strategic partner.
Exactly. India is a rising power. Growing economy, huge consumer market. Canada's got significant trade and investment ties with India. Risking those relationships would have a big impact, economic and political.
So what are Trudeau's options? How can he appease the Sikh community without triggering a full-blown diplomatic crisis with India?
He's trying to walk a fine line. He condemned the assassinations, but he also emphasized the importance of dialogue with India. But India, they're not interested in playing nice.
They're denying everything, accusing Canada of harboring terrorists. It seems like they're playing hardball.
They are. This is where that war elephant diplomacy comes in. India is showing they're not afraid to use their power, even if it means alienating some partners. They're betting that their strategic importance, especially with the U.S.-China rivalry going on, gives them leverage.
So they're calling Canada's bluff, saying, we're too big to push around, deal with it.
You could see it that way. But it's a risky strategy. India's aggressive stance could backfire, push Canada closer to the U.S. and other countries that are wary of India's growing power.
Okay, so we've got this standoff. But what about the Sikh community itself? Are they united? Do they all support the idea of Khalistan?
That's an important point. The Sikh community, they're not all on the same page. There are a range of views on Khalistan. Some Sikhs are very passionate about an independent state. Others want more autonomy within India. And then there are those who oppose the Khalistan movement altogether. They see it as dangerous and divisive.
So it's not as simple as Sikhs versus India.
Nope. There's a lot of internal debate, disagreement within the Sikh community. And those divisions, they get exploited. Both India and Canada try to build relationships with different groups within the diaspora. They use it to advance their own interests.
So everyone's playing multiple sides of this incredibly complex game. And the Sikh community is caught in the middle.
Exactly. And it's important to remember the human cost here. Real people's lives are being affected, families torn apart, communities traumatized, individuals targeted for their beliefs. This isn't just some abstract geopolitical game, it's real people's lives.
This is all so heavy. We've covered so much ground, the historical context, the grievances, the politics, the human cost, and I'm still wondering, what's next? Where does this all go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it? There are no easy answers. It's a deep-rooted conflict. Finding a solution means a real change in mindset from both India and the Sikh diaspora.
So you're saying there's hope?
There's always hope. But it takes addressing those grievances, acknowledging past wrongs, real dialogue, reconciliation.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Are there any signs that either side is actually willing to do that?
There have been attempts at dialogue, but they often fall apart because of mistrust and political maneuvering. It's a delicate process, and progress is slow, often frustrating.
So we're at a stalemate, a geopolitical game of chicken.
I wouldn't say we're doomed, but the path forward is tricky. We need to get past this idea of us versus them, recognize that we're all connected.
That's a powerful message. But how do we put it into action? How do we break this cycle of violence and mistrust?
That's a question that deserves its own deep dive, but I think it starts with education. Understanding the history, the different perspectives. We need to give more attention to those who are working for peace, reconciliation, both in India and the Sikh diaspora.
So instead of focusing on the loudest, most extreme voices, we need to hear those voices of moderation, voices of reason.
Exactly. Those voices, they offer the best hope. A future where Sikhs and Indians can coexist peacefully, respectfully, in India and around the world.
This has been so insightful, but also emotionally draining. I think we need a moment to process all of this.
Take your time. It's a lot to take in.
When we come back, let's talk about what this all means for the future. Canada, India, the Sikh community worldwide. This story's far from over, and the stakes are high. Stay with us. All right, we're back, and wow, this deep dive has been heavy. But it's been eye-opening. We've uncovered this hidden history, a history that most people don't even know about. But it's crucial for understanding what's going on between India and Canada right now.
It really highlights the challenges of our world today. Globalization, interconnectedness, what happens in one country can have a ripple effect across continents, Bring up old wounds, ignite passions.
Like a chain reaction, a butterfly effect, but on a global scale.
Exactly. In this situation, it shows how domestic politics and international relations, they're all tangled up. What happens inside a country can shape its actions on the world stage, and what happens on that world stage can shake things up domestically.
So this isn't just some isolated incident between Canada and India. It's part of a bigger picture, a global trend. What are we seeing here?
We're seeing nationalism on the rise, identity politics all over the world. And that translates into a more aggressive approach to international relations. Less compromise, more hardball tactics. Countries are less worried about the collateral damage.
And India, with that war elephant diplomacy, they seem to be leading the charge.
India's projecting power, pushing back against anything they see as a threat, showing they're not afraid to fight. This approach, it's got its pros and cons. It shows strength, resolve, can deter adversaries, gives India more leverage in negotiations. But it also risks alienating partners, hurting their reputation, making the world a little less stable.
So it's a gamble with unpredictable consequences. Let's bring it back to Canada for a minute. How is this crisis affecting Canada's politics at home and their role in the world?
Domestically, it's exposed some deep divisions, especially between the Sikh community and the rest of Canada. And it's put pressure on Trudeau. He's trying to balance those competing interests, keep those political alliances strong.
He's walking a tightrope, that's for sure. One wrong step could lead to a political crisis, maybe even his government collapsing.
And on the world stage, this crisis, it's testing Canada, their commitment to human rights, their ability to stand up to a powerful country like India. It's raised questions about their place in the world, their ability to navigate this complex geopolitical landscape.
So it's not just a diplomatic spat, it's a test of Canada's values, their role in the world. Speaking of values, let's talk about the Sikh community itself. We've mentioned those different perspectives, some passionate about Khalistan, some wanting more autonomy within India, some opposed to the movement altogether. How do you see these different viewpoints playing out in the future?
That's the big question, isn't it? If things get worse, it's possible the more moderate voices in the Sikh community get drowned out. The more radical voices take over. But if there's real effort put into dialogue or reconciliation, maybe they can find common ground, work towards a future that's more peaceful, more constructive.
So there's potential for unity, but there's also potential for further division. It all depends on what happens next. It's a lot to think about.
And in all of this, it's important to remember the human side. Real people on all sides of this conflict, they're suffering, they're afraid, they want a better future.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the politics, the strategy, and forget that real people are hurting.
As we wrap up this deep dive, here's what I want you to take away from it. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay compassionate. Educate yourself, challenge your own assumptions, speak out against injustice, against intolerance.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. It's been incredibly eye-opening.
It was my pleasure.
And to you, our listener, thank you for diving deep with us. We hope this exploration has given you a better understanding of this complex situation. The Sikh Separatist movement, the tensions between India and Canada, and those global forces that are shaping our world. Remember, knowledge is power, and empathy. It's essential. Go out there, be a force for good in the world. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.